In the heart of an expansive savanna, where golden grass swayed with the rhythm of the wind and ancient baobab trees stood like silent witnesses to centuries gone by, there lived a woman named Amara. She was no ordinary villager, though her hands bore the calluses of labor from years spent tending fields under the scorching African sun. Her eyes held a wisdom that seemed older than time itself. To most outsiders who passed through her small village nestled at the edge of the wilderness, she appeared unremarkable, a rural woman whose life revolved around fetching water, cooking meals over open fires, and weaving baskets from dried reeds. But those who truly knew her understood that beneath her quiet demeanor lay secrets as vast as the continent itself. Amara's days began before dawn, when the first light painted the horizon in hues of orange and purple. The village would slowly come alive with the chatter of children, the lowing of cattle, and the rhythmic pounding of mortar and pestle as women prepared meals for their families. Yet, even among these familiar sounds, Amara carried herself differently. While others spoke loudly and laughed freely, she moved with purpose, her steps deliberate, her gaze often lost in thought. Her neighbors admired her kindness but dismissed it as simple generosity. They had no idea how deeply rooted her actions were in something far greater: Ubuntu. Ubuntu, a philosophy whispered through generations across Africa, was more than just a word to Amara. It was a way of life, a belief that humanity thrives only when we uplift one another, that I am because we are. For years, she had quietly embodied this principle, helping widows rebuild their homes after storms, teaching young girls how to read beneath the shade of acacia trees, and sharing whatever little food she had with travelers stranded on dusty roads. But lately, whispers of discontent had begun to spread through the village. Some accused her of being naive, wasting her energy on people who could never repay her. Others mocked her, saying her efforts wouldn't change anything in a world so harsh and unforgiving. One fateful morning, however, everything changed. A group of strangers arrived in the village, their faces obscured by cloaks made of animal hides, their feet caked with dirt from distant lands. They brought news of a looming threat, a powerful warlord named Kofi, whose army swept across villages like wildfire, leaving destruction in its wake. His reputation was fearsome. Tales of his cruelty echoed in every corner of the region. He demanded tribute, food, livestock, and gold, or else he vowed to burn entire communities to ashes. Panic rippled through the villagers. Men gathered in huddles, debating whether to fight or flee. Women clutched their children tightly, tears streaming down their cheeks. And amidst all the chaos, Amara remained calm, her expression unreadable. When the village chief called for a meeting to decide their fate, everyone expected him to take charge, to devise a plan to save them. Instead, it was Amara who stepped forward, her voice steady yet commanding. "We cannot defeat Kofi with spears alone," she said, her words silencing the murmurs around her. "But if we stand together, if we embrace the spirit of Ubuntu, we might just have a chance." Skeptical glances were exchanged. How could a mere woman, known only for her quiet acts of kindness, possibly lead them against such overwhelming odds? Yet something about her tone struck a chord. Perhaps it was the fire in her eyes, or maybe it was the weight of her conviction. Whatever it was, the villagers reluctantly agreed to hear her out. And so, Amara began to weave her plan, not one of brute force, but of unity, strategy, and courage drawn from the very essence of what it meant to be human. Little did anyone know, this decision would not only alter the course of their lives forever, but also reveal the extraordinary power hidden within the heart of a seemingly ordinary woman. Amara's plan was unlike anything the villagers had ever heard. She didn't speak of sharpening spears or building barricades. Instead, she spoke of stories. Stories that would travel faster than Kofi's army. Stories that would unite neighboring villages under a common cause. "Kofi thrives on fear," she explained, her voice carrying the weight of someone who had seen too much suffering. "But fear is a shadow, and shadows disappear when faced with light. If we can show him that our strength lies not in weapons but in our unity, he will falter." Her first step was to send messengers, swift-footed runners and skilled storytellers, to nearby villages. These messengers carried no weapons, only words. Tales of Ubuntu, of how one village had once stood together to overcome famine, of how another had shared its last drops of water during a drought. They told stories of Amara herself, how she had saved a child from a lion's jaws using nothing but her wits, how she had healed a sick elder with herbs found deep in the forest. The messengers urged the neighboring villages to join forces, not just for their own survival, but for the survival of something greater, the spirit of community that defined them all. At first, skepticism reigned. Some villages refused to listen, fearing retaliation from Kofi if they were seen as allies to Amara's people. Others dismissed the idea outright, claiming that a philosophy like Ubuntu was powerless against swords and shields. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, the tide began to turn. One village sent a delegation of elders to meet with Amara. Another offered grain and livestock to support the growing alliance. A third pledged its strongest warriors to stand alongside the villagers. Each act of solidarity strengthened the resolve of those involved, creating a ripple effect that spread far beyond what anyone had imagined. Meanwhile, Amara worked tirelessly within her own village. She organized training sessions not for battle but for resilience. She taught the women how to create smoke signals that could alert distant allies of danger. She showed the children how to weave nets strong enough to trap invaders' horses. She even enlisted the elderly to craft decoys, life-size scarecrows dressed in warrior garb, that could confuse Kofi's scouts. Every task, no matter how small, was infused with purpose. Even the tiniest thread, she often said, can hold a tapestry together. As the days passed, the village transformed. What had once been a place of quiet routines became a hive of activity. People who had never spoken to each other before now worked side by side, their differences forgotten in the face of a shared goal. Laughter replaced fear, and hope began to bloom where despair had once taken root. Yet, despite these changes, tension lingered. Rumors reached them that Kofi's army was drawing closer, his soldiers leaving a trail of destruction in their wake. The villagers knew they couldn't rely solely on preparation. They needed a miracle. That miracle came in the form of an unexpected ally, a young man named Tund, who had grown up in the village but left years ago to seek fortune in the city. Tund returned one evening, his clothes torn and his face gaunt, bearing news that chilled everyone to the bone. He had been captured by Kofi's men and forced to serve as a scout. During his time with the army, he had learned their tactics, their weaknesses, and most importantly, their fears. Kofi believes himself invincible, Tund whispered during a secret meeting with Amara and the village elders. But I've seen cracks in his armor. His soldiers are tired, hungry, and losing faith in him. If we strike at the right moment, we can break them. Amara listened intently, her mind racing with possibilities. She knew that violence should always be a last resort, but she also understood that sometimes peace required standing firm against those who sought to destroy it. With Tund's knowledge and the growing network of allied villages, she devised a daring strategy. They would lure Kofi's army into the dense thicket surrounding their village, a maze-like terrain filled with hidden pitfalls and narrow paths. Once inside, the invaders would find themselves disoriented and vulnerable, easy targets for ambushes led by skilled archers and spear throwers. It was risky, but it was their best chance. The night before the battle, Amara gathered the villagers in the center of the village. The air was thick with anticipation, the stars above casting a pale glow over the assembled crowd. For a long moment, she simply looked at them, her heart swelling with pride. These were her people, ordinary men, women, and children who had risen to meet an extraordinary challenge. Finally, she spoke, her voice soft yet unwavering. Tomorrow we will face Kofi. But remember this. We fight not for revenge, not for glory, but for the future we wish to build. We fight for each other. And as long as we stand together, no force in this world can break us. With those words, she raised her hand, palm open, a gesture symbolizing Ubuntu. One by one, the villagers mirrored her action, their faces illuminated by the flickering light of torches. In that moment, they were no longer individuals. They were a single entity, bound by a shared purpose and an unshakable belief in the power of unity. The dawn broke with an eerie stillness, as if the earth itself was holding its breath. The villagers moved quietly, their preparations complete, their hearts pounding in anticipation. Amara stood at the edge of the thicket, her eyes scanning the horizon where Kofi's army would soon appear. She could feel the weight of responsibility pressing down on her shoulders, but there was no fear, only resolve. This was more than just a battle. It was a test of everything she had ever believed in. If they succeeded, it would prove that Ubuntu was not just a philosophy but a force capable of overcoming even the darkest threats. Kofi's army arrived sooner than expected, their banners fluttering ominously in the wind. From a distance, they looked invincible, a sea of armored warriors marching in perfect formation, their weapons glinting in the morning sun. But up close, Tun's observations became clear. The soldiers' steps were heavy with fatigue, their faces gaunt and hollow-eyed. Some carried bandages stained with blood, while others dragged their feet as though every step required immense effort. They were not the unstoppable force they appeared to be. They were human, vulnerable, and worn down by their own leader's greed. Amara gave the signal, and the plan unfolded like a well-rehearsed dance. A group of villagers, disguised as frightened refugees, approached the advancing army, pleading for mercy and offering to lead them to a hidden treasure deep within the thicket. Their act was convincing enough to pique Kofi's interest. Greed overrode caution, and he ordered his men to follow. As the army entered the dense forest, the villagers melted away into the shadows, leaving behind only faint trails that led deeper into the labyrinth. Inside the thicket, chaos erupted almost immediately. Hidden pits swallowed entire groups of soldiers, their cries echoing through the trees. Arrows rained down from above, fired by archers perched on sturdy branches. Spears flew from concealed alcoves, striking with precision. The narrow paths funneled the invaders into tight formations, making them easy targets. Panic spread quickly among Kofi's ranks as they realized they were trapped, their numbers offering no advantage in such confined spaces. But the real turning point came when the allied villages joined the fray. From all directions, reinforcements poured into the thicket, warriors armed with spears, women wielding farming tools turned into makeshift weapons, and even children throwing stones with surprising accuracy. Together, they formed a wall of resistance that seemed to stretch endlessly. Kofi's soldiers, already demoralized and exhausted, began to falter. Some dropped their weapons and fled, while others surrendered without a fight. The once mighty army crumbled under the sheer force of unity. At the center of it all was Amara, her presence commanding yet calm. She moved between the fighters, offering encouragement, tending to the wounded, and ensuring that no unnecessary violence occurred. When she finally came face to face with Kofi himself, the warlord was unrecognizable from the fearsome figure described in legends. His armor was dented, his sword trembling in his hand, and his eyes wide with disbelief. "Who are you?" he demanded, his voice cracking under the strain of defeat. "I am Amara," she replied simply, stepping closer until she was mere inches away from him. "And I am the woman who showed my people that true power lies not in domination but in connection. You sought to rule through fear, but fear has limits. We chose to stand together, and that made us stronger than anything you could ever unleash." For a moment, Kofi said nothing, his gaze dropping to the ground. Then, with a defeated sigh, he lowered his sword and knelt before her. It was a gesture of surrender, not just of his army, but of the ideology that had driven him to wreak havoc across the land. In that instant, the battle was won, not through brute strength, but through the triumph of compassion over cruelty, unity over division. As the dust settled and the survivors emerged from the thicket, a profound silence fell over the battlefield. The villagers gathered around Amara, their faces etched with awe and gratitude. They had done what many thought impossible. They had defeated a tyrant without losing themselves in the process. Word of their victory spread quickly, carried by the same messengers who had rallied the allied villages. Within days, stories of Amara and the power of Ubuntu reached far beyond the savannah, inspiring countless others to embrace the spirit of community. Yet, for Amara, the greatest reward was not fame or recognition. It was seeing her village, and the surrounding communities, come alive in ways she had never imagined. People who had once been divided by mistrust now shared meals and laughter. Children played together without regard for which village they came from. Even the elders, who had spent decades guarding old grudges, found themselves swapping stories around evening fires. The scars of the battle remained, but they were overshadowed by the bonds that had been forged in its wake. That night, as the stars twinkled above, Amara sat beneath a baobab tree, her hands resting gently on her knees. She didn't need words to express what she felt. The hum of life around her, the laughter, the singing, the quiet conversations, was proof enough that Ubuntu had prevailed. And though she knew challenges lay ahead, she also knew that as long as people remembered the power of standing together, they would always find a way to overcome. As the days turned into weeks, the village and the surrounding region began to heal. The scars of Kofi's invasion were still visible. Burned fields, damaged homes, and the somber faces of those who had lost loved ones. Yet, amidst the ruins, something extraordinary was taking root. The spirit of Ubuntu, once a quiet philosophy whispered among a few, had blossomed into a movement that united entire communities. People from neighboring villages traveled long distances to meet Amara, not just to thank her but to learn from her. They wanted to understand how she had inspired so many to come together, how she had shown them that their strength lay not in individual might but in collective action. Amara welcomed these visitors with open arms, sharing stories of her own journey and the lessons she had learned along the way. She spoke of the time she had been ridiculed for helping a stranger repair his cart, only to discover years later that the same man had saved her village from starvation during a drought. She recounted the story of an elderly woman who had taught her the importance of patience by spending months weaving a single basket, its intricate patterns symbolizing the interconnectedness of life. And she reminded everyone that Ubuntu wasn't about grand gestures or heroic acts. It was about the small, everyday choices that built trust and fostered connection. Her words resonated deeply, especially with the younger generation. Children who had grown up hearing tales of Kofi's cruelty now listened intently as Amara explained how fear could be transformed into courage, how division could give way to unity. Inspired by her example, they began to take initiative in their own ways. Some formed groups to rebuild homes and plant new crops. Others organized storytelling sessions where elders passed down wisdom to the youth. Even the simplest acts, like sharing food with a neighbor or offering a helping hand to someone in need, became expressions of Ubuntu, proof that change could start with even the smallest step. But perhaps the most remarkable transformation occurred within Amara herself. For so long, she had seen herself as just a rural woman, someone whose contributions would never extend beyond the boundaries of her village. Now, she realized that her quiet acts of kindness had rippled outward, touching lives in ways she could never have imagined. She was no longer just Amara. She was a symbol of hope, a living testament to the power of community. Yet, despite this newfound recognition, she remained humble, always deflecting praise onto the people around her. "I didn't do this alone," she would say whenever someone called her a hero. "We did it together." One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of amber and crimson, Amara found herself sitting beside Tund under the same baobab tree where she often reflected. Since his return to the village, Tund had become one of her closest confidants, his sharp mind and strategic thinking proving invaluable during the battle against Kofi. But more than that, he had undergone a personal transformation. The city-bred young man who had once dismissed village life as backward now embraced it fully, finding purpose in serving his community. "You've changed us all, Amara," Tund said softly, breaking the comfortable silence between them. "Not just the village, but me too. I used to think success meant wealth and power. Now I know it's about belonging to something bigger than yourself." Amara smiled, her gaze fixed on the distant hills where the allied villages lay. "That's what Ubuntu is," she replied. "It's not about losing yourself. It's about finding yourself in others. When we lift each other up, we rise higher than we ever could alone." Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of approaching footsteps. It was a group of villagers, carrying drums and instruments, their faces glowing with excitement. "Amara," one of them called out. "Come join us. We're celebrating tonight. Celebrating you. Celebrating us. Celebrating everything we've built together." Amara hesitated for a moment, then nodded, allowing herself to be led toward the center of the village. There, beneath a canopy of stars, the celebration unfolded, a vibrant tapestry of music, dance, and laughter. The air was filled with the rhythmic beats of gem drums, the melodic strains of stringed instruments, and the joyful voices of people singing songs of triumph and unity. Around the fire, men and women danced with abandon, their movements fluid and free, while children twirled and laughed, their giggles ringing like bells in the night. For the first time in what felt like forever, there was no trace of fear or sorrow, only joy, only connection. As Amara watched the scene unfold, she felt a deep sense of peace settle over her. This was what she had fought for, not just survival but the restoration of humanity itself. In this moment, surrounded by the people she loved, she knew that the true victory wasn't defeating Kofi. It was rediscovering the essence of what it meant to be human. As the celebration continued late into the night, Amara found herself standing at the edge of the gathering, her heart swelling with a mixture of emotions. Joy, gratitude, and even a tinge of sadness washed over her as she reflected on everything that had transpired. She thought about those who were no longer there, the friends and neighbors who had sacrificed so much to protect their community, but she also felt their presence in the laughter and music that filled the air. They were part of this moment too, their spirits woven into the fabric of the village's newfound unity. The fire crackled in the center of the circle, casting flickering shadows on the faces of those dancing and singing around it. Children ran barefoot through the crowd, their giggles mingling with the rhythmic beats of the drums. Elders sat on mats nearby, clapping their hands and nodding along to the music, their weathered faces glowing with pride. Even the animals seemed to sense the joy. Goats bleated softly in the distance, and crickets chirped in harmony with the melodies. It was as if the entire world had come alive to celebrate the triumph of humanity over despair. Amara closed her eyes for a moment, letting the sounds and sensations wash over her. She could feel the warmth of the fire on her skin, hear the laughter of children echoing like a promise of a brighter future. But more than anything, she could feel the weight of connection. The invisible threads that bound everyone together, stronger now than ever before. This was Ubuntu in its purest form, a shared existence, a collective heartbeat. When she opened her eyes again, she noticed Tund approaching, holding 2 calabashes filled with palm wine. He handed one to her with a grin, his once guarded expression now replaced by an openness that mirrored the transformation of the entire village. "To Ubuntu," he said, raising his calabash in a toast. Amara smiled and lifted hers as well. "To us," she replied, her voice steady but filled with emotion. They drank deeply, the sweet tang of the wine a reminder of life's simple pleasures. Around them, the celebration showed no signs of slowing down. If anything, it grew louder, more vibrant, as if the villagers were determined to make up for all the nights they had spent in fear. As the hours passed, the festivities began to wind down, though the energy remained palpable. People started to drift away, returning to their homes or settling down near the fire to rest. Amara lingered for a while longer, watching as the flames slowly died down, leaving behind glowing embers that pulsed faintly in the darkness. The sight reminded her of something, a lesson she had learned long ago from her grandmother. Even when the fire seems to fade, the coals beneath hold the potential to reignite. Just like hope, it only takes a little effort to bring it roaring back to life. Finally, as the last notes of music faded into the night, Amara turned and walked toward her modest hut. The path was illuminated by the soft glow of moonlight filtering through the trees, casting silvery patterns on the ground. She paused briefly to look back at the village, her village, now bathed in tranquility. Everything seemed different yet familiar, as though the battle against Kofi had stripped away layers of fear and division, revealing the true essence of what they had always been capable of becoming. Inside her hut, Amara lit a small oil lamp and sat on the woven mat that served as her bed. She reached for a wooden box tucked away in the corner, one she hadn't opened in years. Inside were mementos of her life, photos of her parents, a bracelet her mother had made for her, and a small carved figurine of a baobab tree, gifted to her by a traveling storyteller. Each item held memories, stories of struggles overcome and lessons learned. She picked up the figurine, running her fingers over its smooth surface, and smiled. Like the baobab, she had stood firm through storms, her roots growing deeper with every challenge. For a long time, she simply sat there, lost in thought. She knew that life would not always be easy. Challenges would arise, and there would be moments when the spirit of Ubuntu would be tested. But she also knew that the foundation they had built together was strong enough to withstand whatever came their way. The villagers had proven that unity wasn't just a dream. It was a choice, one they had made together and would continue to make every day. As she extinguished the lamp and lay down, Amara felt a profound sense of fulfillment. For so long, she had doubted her place in the world, wondering if her quiet acts of kindness mattered in the grand scheme of things. Now, she understood that those acts had been the seeds of something far greater. They had grown into a forest of resilience, sheltering countless lives and inspiring others to do the same. Her final thought before drifting off to sleep was simple yet profound. Ubuntu is not just a philosophy. It's a way of being. And as long as people remembered that, they would never truly be alone. The next morning, the village awoke to the sound of birdsong and the gentle rustle of leaves in the breeze. The sun rose over the horizon, bathing the land in golden light. Life went on as it always did, but it was different now. There was a renewed sense of purpose, a shared understanding that they were stronger together than apart. And at the heart of it all was Amara, not as a leader, but as a reminder of what was possible when people chose compassion over conflict, unity over division. In the end, the story of Amara and her village became more than just a tale of survival. It became a legend, passed down through generations, a testament to the enduring power of Ubuntu. And whenever someone doubted their ability to make a difference, they would remember the woman who had shown them that even the smallest act of kindness could spark a revolution of the heart. The end.